purely utilitarian justified. And I don't think Christians or non-Christians are different in that. I hear them equally appeal to that utilitarian justification for that action. That's my first example. My next example, what would normally seem immoral by most evangelicals is the use of embryonic stem cells for research in the hopes of finding a cure for a host of genetic and degenerative diseases, spinal cord injuries, and eventually even the growing of replacement organs, which would be much more viable than donor organs. The vast majority of evangelicals are opposed to abortion on the grounds that it is murder, the taking of an innocent life. This argument is based on the scriptures and what is taught in regards to the sanctity of life, and rests in the ontological belief that all humans are made in the image of God. It is rather disturbing to find that almost half of those who hold such a view on abortion would then advocate the using of cells taken from destroyed embryos in the hopes of accomplishing some good. Here the argument is perhaps a little more subtle, but it comes down to the ends-based justification. Although most evangelicals and even President Bush believe that the making of new embryonic stem cell strains needs to be prohibited, the argument claims that destroying the existing embryonic stem cell lines we already have would be a double tragedy. Yes, a life was taken to acquire these stem cells for research, but the life can't be brought back, so why not use the existing cells for good? Another argument is that the zygotes used for embryonic stem cell research were never implanted in the womb and were therefore never intended to become human, so their cells can be used. When utility becomes your guide, you may find yourselves building monuments and medical wonders into the heavens, yet at least in this case, your foundation rests on the desecration of the dead and the slaughter of the innocents. And if you want the stats, that I'm not just pulling those out of my hat, I mean, I did a lot of research on looking at the stats and surveys on how many evangelicals supported embryonic stem cell research. I was stunned. And it was a purely utilitarian reason. The end justifies the means. The good that could be accomplished outweighs the horror of what we're doing. And then my final example, actually I might give two more, is the utilitarian justification for the use of torture. I've taught Christian ethics for the past 15 years, and this is the first semester I actually had to set aside time to explain to my class why torture is wrong categorically. This was like 2 years ago. After all, Americans don't torture, and certainly not Christians. Yet 90% of my students believe torture was an acceptable means of acquiring information if that information could save lives. When presented with the ticking bomb scenario, you guys know what that is? It's for those of you that don't know, it's basically this idea that some terrorist has supposedly planted a bomb in a major metropolitan area, and if it's not stopped, millions of lives could be lost. And you've captured this terrorist, and the question is, would you use any means necessary, including torture, to extract information to find out where that bomb was to save lives? How many of you would resort even to torture if you thought it could save millions of lives?
That's a hard question.
What do you mean it's a hard question? Oh dear, I guess we're going to have this torture discussion again. Maybe not 90% of you, maybe you're afraid to raise your hand after the beginning of this paper. Okay, that's a pretty high number.
If it's a matter of justice, would that make it right then? He's being unjust or unjust, by planting that bomb to murder millions. So wouldn't we be acting justly by doing that in order to save those people?
You'd be, if you're talking natural law theory, you would be just in taking his life because he has forfeited his right to life.
Would we become?
You're not just in torturing.
Right. He's the monster, but in turn, would we become the monster by torturing him?
Not if you're a utilitarian. If you're a utilitarian, you're doing an absolutely moral thing. Just like, who was it? Chuck Bauer?
Jack Bauer.
Jack Bauer? Yeah. Jack Bauer, his younger brother, who does the real dirty work when no one's looking. Okay. The consensus was that one must do whatever it takes to save lives. In fact, they went so far as to say that if you did not torture the terrorist subject, you were culpable and responsible for any lives lost due to your lack of zealous interrogation. I'm not trying to project my own personal teaching experiences to the evangelical community at large. Well, actually, I am. But apparently, my students are not alone in their beliefs. A survey by Pew Research Center for the People in the Press, and this was October 12th through 24th in 2005, nationwide survey concluded among over 2,000 adults, reports of a total of 65% of white evangelicals believe that torture is justified under certain conditions, as opposed to only 31% who thought torture is never justifiable. What race has to do with this survey, I'm not certain. Perhaps that can be the topic of another paper. Yeah, white evangelicals, I'm not sure if black evangelicals would have different numbers, but that would be interesting. But yeah, I was really surprised. 65% of evangelicals in the survey thought that torture was acceptable. Don't you guys see a problem with that? Or do you just think I am out of touch? This is a post 9/11 America, and what might have been extreme in the past, Blackburn, is now just the way it goes. We have new rules, new ways we have to do things, because we live in a much rougher world than the idealistic world you grew up in the 60s.
So what are you supposed to do in this situation then, if you don't believe in not a utilitarian?
Well, there's a lot of things you could do. But torturing, I would say, is not one of the options. At least if you're claiming to be a Christian. If you're non-Christian, I don't know, I would have arguments for you as well why you shouldn't do it. But especially for Christians, for heaven's sakes. I mean, what about your little WWJD bracelets? Could you really plug in who would Jesus torture? I mean, could you really ask yourself that question? Who would Jesus drop atomic bombs on? I mean, really? Could you possibly say that? Come on, all you torturers, tell me, why is it acceptable to torture someone?
It's almost like you're choosing the lesser of two evils. You could be arguing that one is very good, but the point remains, if you knew for an absolute fact that torture would let you save millions of people, what do? It's the same as the boy on the tracks versus the train full of people. Either one is horrible. If you do nothing, millions of people are still going to die, the two trains are going to collide. So what's the difference in choosing it's okay to let your son die because you love him, where it's not okay to hurt an individual to save more? It seems to me like both of them are unethical. It's unethical to torture someone, but it's also unethical to allow millions of people to die. So at that point, you have to choose which one you'll live with and which one of the evils you find more reasonable. I don't think torture is right, but if it comes down to torture versus a couple million people, which answer would seem, they're both horrible, but which one do you choose? If choosing to do nothing is choosing to let the 7 million die, you can't choose to, I'm not going to dirty my hands, you can't wash your hands